Good morning. Thank you all for being here today as crime survivors and victim advocates call on Oregon to increase our public safety. My name is Carrie Naughton, and I'm the director of the Crime Survivors Program at Partnership for Safety and Justice. Partnership for Safety and Justice is a statewide membership organization dedicated to making Oregon's public safety policies more effective and more just. And we all want to be safe. As those of us who are crime survivors and also as victim advocates, we know firsthand the impact that crime has not only on individuals, but also on families and entire communities. Many crime survivors are left to deal with physical, psychological, and financial consequences of crime, many for years after the crime occurred. It is important that Oregon prioritizes public safety strategies that increase public safety so that fewer Oregonians will ever become victims. It is also important that Oregon prioritizes programs that help victims of crime find safety and rebuild their lives. There is now a wealth of research that can guide public safety policies to help states invest in strategies that will increase public safety. Unfortunately, Oregon's public safety spending is based on a sentencing structure that is out of date with the research. 67% of Oregon's limited public safety dollars are spent on corrections. This leaves little left for other important parts of our public safety system, like law enforcement, the courts, drug and alcohol treatment, mental health services, and also victim services. It will take time for Oregon to balance our public safety spending and achieve greater safety. But smart decisions right now during this legislative cycle, like continuing the delay of Measure 57 and fixing Measure 73, will help get Oregon on the right track. This will also prevent, even more drastic cuts in the future. Today, we will hear from crime victims and survivors and victim advocates talk about the impact of crime, the importance of crime victim services, and also why Oregon should balance our public safety spending. And we are fortunate to have with us today Rebecca Nichols. Rebecca is the executive director of the Portland Women's Crisis Line. Founded in 1972, the Portland Women's Crisis Line was one of the first 5 sexual violence crisis lines in the United States. Today, the Portland Women's Crisis Line provides survivors of domestic and sexual violence immediate access to safety planning, crisis intervention, emergency housing resources, and other vital resources and support. Rebecca?
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks again for being here. So as Carrie said, my name is Rebecca Nichols, and I'm the Executive Director for the Portland Women's Crisis Line. And the Portland Women's Crisis Line believes that everyone deserves a life free of domestic and sexual violence. Domestic and sexual violence services are lifelines to Oregonians. We are a vital part of Oregon's public safety system and are part of the fabric of communities across the state. Most people know that domestic and sexual violence programs literally save lives by providing a safe place to stay for people who are leaving dangerous situations at home. In 2009 alone, Oregon's domestic and sexual violence program provided shelter to over 5,000 people, and nearly half of those were children. What many people don't know is that programs do so much more than shelter. In 2009, programs answered almost 166,000 calls for help, provided services like hospital accompaniment and support groups to over 27,000 people, and reached over 75,000 people through community education and awareness events. A recent example of a survivor who accessed our services at the crisis line was a woman who called us after she was sexually assaulted. She didn't have anywhere to go because her perpetrator was still looking for her, and all of the local shelters were full. We were able to voucher her into a hotel for the night, and the next morning we provided assistance to help her relocate to a different part of the country. When she got to the train station, she called us to let us know that she didn't have any food and that her trip was 3 days long. And so we actually gathered food from our own staff kitchen to help her get through her trip. And that's just one example of the nearly 20,000 people we talk to every year. Our services are needed now more than ever. While crime in general has decreased, domestic violence-related murders have increased. Since January 2009, at least 90 Oregonians were killed as a result of domestic violence, and 10 of these victims were children. Tragically, programs just can't meet the need. In 2009, over 19,000 requests for shelter went unmet because all of the local shelters were full and there weren't enough resources available. The troubling economy has made the situation worse. Victims have fewer personal resources, so shelter services are vitally important to ensure that people can find safety when leaving abusive situations. Victims often have to stay in shelter longer because there just aren't enough jobs or affordable housing available. At the Portland Women's Crisis Line, we've seen that victims are also experiencing an increase in physical violence at home, and that it's taking much longer for victims to find shelter, sometimes up to a month in the Portland area. PWCL and other programs across Oregon would not exist without government funding that stabilizes us and helps us keep our doors open. But current funding levels statewide are already less than half of what the Department of Justice and the Department of Human Services is determined is necessary to meet the minimal need for emergency services, and now we're facing funding cuts. I'm here today to say that our public safety spending is out of balance. Despite the severity of domestic and sexual violence, we are not investing the appropriate resources into life-saving services. Victim services is one of the vital parts of our public safety system, and that's suffering from the increasing portion of public safety dollars that the corrections budget is taking up. New increased sentences, like Measure 57 and Measure 73, will add to corrections costs without making Oregonians measurably safer. I, along with many other people in the victim advocacy community, want legislators to prioritize services over new sentences. It's time that we start rebalancing public safety spending to ensure that every victim who makes the brave step of coming forward for help has access to services that can save her life. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you so much for the work that you do every day to help people in danger find safety and rebuild their lives. And thank you also for being here today. It's abundantly clear that victim services in the community isn't just smart spending, it's the right thing to do. I want to say that Oregon is not alone in trying to fix a public safety spending approach that's completely out of balance. Many states have adopted a justice reinvestment approach to identify targeted ways to shift resources from prison spending toward a range of community and system-based responses that can achieve even greater safety. There is growing support among victim advocates in Oregon and across the nation for states to adopt this justice reinvestment approach. Here to speak with us today about the importance of system-based victim advocacy and also the potential of a justice reinvestment approach is Bob Robison. Bob is the retired Victim Services Manager for the Multnomah County Department of Community Justice. Bob?
Good morning. Again, excuse me. My name is Bob Robison. That's R-O-B-I-S-O-N. I'm humbled to speak after Rebecca. The work that the Women's Crisis Line does in Portland is really, really important. Had a lot of occasion to work with them and refer people to them for the support they needed. So why am I here today, and why do I care about this issue? 2 years ago, I retired from Multnomah County's Parole and Probation Agency. I spent the last 6 years of my career helping hundreds of crime victims see that their rights were honored. Why did I retire? I retired partly because the position was cut. It was yet one more budget cut. It was like, I think, the 13th budget cut I'd been through. And we finally reduced the services in the agency to the point where we no longer could provide direct support to crime victims. The agency is now looking for funding to replace that. I hope they find it. I think it's important work. But I want to be clear, this isn't a hard luck story. I was also fortunate my wife and I could afford to retire, so when the sun shines, we really enjoy our retirement. Back to the work. My clients usually had one of three concerns. First, financial restitution. That was the person who owed them money for the crime was not paying. I'd like to point out that when somebody is in prison, they're not in a position to easily repay the restitution. Another reason why long prison sentences don't always make sense. The second area where I spent a lot of time working with victims and survivors was referrals to community-based services, such as the Portland Women's Crisis Line, and other services for counseling, often for memories of past sexual assault, most often when the person who committed the crime is released. And the third area, and perhaps the most most time-consuming, was planning for safety. Many of my clients had survived hideous violent crimes, and primarily they wanted to know that the person who hurt them has been in treatment. Please remember that 93% of Oregon prisoners will be returned to the community, so it's inevitable for most survivors of violent crime that they're going to face that situation. I've decided to stay involved in these issues of corrections policy because I know how devastating crime can be to victims and survivors. I saw it firsthand. I also know that we can make a difference. As Rebecca said, and we have good sound research, we can intervene and stop family violence. We can improve our collection of restitution. We can get people the money that's owed to them. We can provide counseling to help victims and survivors recover from the trauma of the crimes they've experienced. And we do know of crime prevention programs that do work. I believe strongly that we can help keep families, individuals, and communities safer. But we need the money to do that. So based on my experience, I'd like to make 3 points. The first is that, in my opinion, Oregon taxpayers aren't getting the return on the investments that we all pay. We're now spending $1.4 billion in corrections. I think we're getting a poor return on that investment. We now have very good research to guide us in sentencing and rehabilitation programs. We've always known that long-term incarceration can make people worse. Criminal justice experts tell us that our overuse of long prison sentences is taking money away from other more effective parts of the system, like youth services, state police, community corrections, and we're here to talk about victim services. Our director of the Department of Corrections, Max Williams, will tell you that our prison costs are now unsustainable. We can change that, and we can free up money for other things we know work. Costly prison beds should be reserved for the most violent, high-risk offenders. In Oregon, Oregon was recently found to be leading the nation in reducing recidivism, keeping people from returning to prison. That is primarily because of our approach to sound community supervision. We need to make sure that community corrections are strengthened, not reduced because of overinvestment in prison costs. So that's my first point about our return on investment. The second point I'd like to make is, as Carrie brought up, we have some long-term strategies that have been demonstrated around the country that are being termed justice reinvestment. Worked across the country, from Texas to New Hampshire. These strategies have reduced prison costs, at the same time increased public safety by investing in proven public programs. Programs such as alcohol and drug treatment, well-structured community corrections, once again, early intervention to reduce family violence against children and families, work programs to help offenders earn the money they need to pay restitution and get on with their lives, services to help people recover from the trauma of violence and sexual abuse, and on and on. Oregon needs to adopt this long-term strategy. We can't do it real quickly. It's going to take some time. It's probably work that's going to need to be done in the interim. But the third point I want to get at is there are some short-term things we can do, and the legislature can do them right now. As been said, we think that delaying Measure 57 and fixing Measure 73 will save us some money that can be used for other things. This will slow the unsustainable growth in our prison costs. We believe that delaying Measure 57 will result in savings of $120 to $260 million over the next decade. This is a time when Oregon needs to get a better return on the investment for all our state spending, especially correction spending. And I guess I'd like to end by saying that service and support to crime victims and survivors of crime is a core right and an area where we need to continually improve. Thanks.
Bob, thank you so much for your service to crime victims, including in your retirement. We appreciate you being here today. And I would like to point out that in Oregon, there are a number of groups, including the Oregon Business Association, the Oregon Education Association, SEIU, and the Human Services Coalition of Oregon, that are asking legislators to delay Measure 57 and fix Measure 73 to continue to slow this unsustainable growth in prison costs. You know, to me, the saddest part of all of this is that victims are not benefiting from Oregon's costly focus on prison spending. And with us today is Arwen Bird, the survivor of a drunk driving crash. And Arwen wants to spend a few moments just talking about her own experiences surviving crime and also her vision for a better public safety system. Arwen?
Thank you, Carrie. And I'll just stay right here. I hope everybody can hear me okay without the microphone. As Carrie said, I'll give you a little bit of a background first. On February 28th of 1993, the car that my sister and I were driving in was rear-ended by a man who had too much to drink and chose to drive. He hit us going 70 miles per hour, and the impact of the crash paralyzed me. As our car rolled over an embankment, my neck was dislocated and my sister got a bruise on her brain. From the crash, I lived with a spinal cord injury, and my sister lives with a mild traumatic brain injury. We have worked to rebuild our lives through countless hours of physical therapy, emotional therapy, lots of love and support from our friends and family. I want to make sure that what happened to me and my sister doesn't happen to anybody else. That's why I want Oregon legislators to strengthen our public safety system by making smart cuts to corrections costs and using those savings to fully fund victim services. I believe in creating a public safety system that enables people who have been convicted of crimes to take accountability for their actions. Just locking someone up for an arbitrary amount of time does not mean that person will take accountability, and it does not mean that I or the community will be safer. Almost 70% of Oregon's public safety dollars are spent on a correction system that is based in an antiquated sentencing structure instead of research and evidence-based practices. This leaves little left for other vital parts of our public safety system, like victim services, keeping police on the streets, the courts, and crime prevention efforts. I believe that public safety is achieved when crime victims and survivors have access to services that can help them rebuild their lives. In the 18 years since my sister and I were rear-ended by the man who had too much to drink and chose to drive, I've watched the system convict and punish him, while the few services that were initially available for my sister and me have dwindled. It's painfully ironic to witness the ways that precious resources that could be spent making a difference in the lives of crime survivors are wasted under our current system. 18 years have passed since the crash that paralyzed me, and while hospital and rehab are all memories that have faded into the background of my life, crime survivors like me are doing what we can with the resources available to us. I'm glad for short-term resources like crime victims' compensation, which provides valuable assistance when people need it most. But we need to have comprehensive services that are available for survivors in the long run. What my sister or me or any one survivor does to further our recoveries years down the road pales compared to what the state of Oregon could do with millions freed up from smart sentencing reforms, and it could even increase public safety while reinvesting part of the savings into victim services. Thank you for your time.
Arwen, thank you so much for being with us today. You're truly an inspiration to countless people who have survived crime. You definitely show that it is possible to have a full and good life in the aftermath of crime. So thank you for being here and speaking with us all. Our final speaker was Terry Quinteros, who is the Executive Director of the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. The Coalition is a statewide organization made up of programs across Oregon that help survivors of domestic and sexual violence find safety and rebuild their lives. Unfortunately, Terry was unable to be here this morning, but she did send me a statement that she asked me to read. As the Executive Director of the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, I am deeply concerned with Oregon's approach to public safety spending. Although I could not physically attend this press conference, I stand here in spirit with other survivors and victim advocates to say Oregon can and must do better. Our public safety spending is out of balance. The Department of Corrections budget makes up almost 70% of Oregon's public safety spending, and this is at the expense of other vital programs and services. Although incarceration plays a role in public safety strategy, crime survivors and victims overall have not benefited from Oregon's ever-increasing and unsustainable prison spending. There is a problem when the state's prison budget is $1.4 billion, but funding for life-saving domestic and sexual violence programs barely breaks $4 million. In 2009, there were over 19,500 requests for emergency shelter from violence that went unmet because of a lack of funding. That is tragic. We hope legislators begin to shift our public safety policies and spending in ways that reel in prison spending and invest in prevention and programs that protect crime survivors and help them rebuild their lives. And we also hope it's clear that Oregon's public safety spending is out of balance and should be better prioritized to create more safety. Now is the time that we can start making good decisions, like continuing the delay of Measure 57 and fixing Measure 73, that will help put Oregon's public safety spending on the right track. And we are all available for questions if anyone has any.
Given the reports from the Legislative Fiscal Office and an earlier Pew report, why haven't we seen more movement to date on these budget, and particularly the delays of the two measures that you just mentioned, 57 and 73?
I think that's a very good question. And I think that the evidence is clear that policies like this are not creating more safety. And we are definitely advocating that legislators make smart decisions and do the right thing now, like continuing the delay of Measure 57 and fixing Measure 73. I think that these are long-term conversations, but doing things like that now can help get us on a better track.
But we're like, if we believe what the leaders say as their target is June 30th, we're in the last month of the legislative session. And
thankfully still time to make decisions like this.
I've heard a lot of crime victims say precisely the opposite, that these people should be locked up for as long as humanly possible. There's a lot of disagreement, I would imagine, among crime victims about the best approach.
Well, in my over a decade of working with crime victims, I've seen a consistent theme that people want to make sure, like Arwen said, people want to make sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else. And that's why we believe that it's so important to shift our public safety spending so that it can go to resources that will create the most safety. Now, obviously, prisons are an important part of our overall public safety strategy, but our out-of-balance funding has made it actually more difficult to fund those other public safety strategies that will create more safety, and also has made it more difficult to fund services that help victims find safety and rebuild their lives, like PWCL and Oregon's other domestic and sexual violence programs. It's all about finding the balance.
And I do want to say as well that I think you're right that some survivors of crime do feel that way, but I've certainly spoken with other survivors who, more than anything else, just want to be able to get on with their lives, and that means have a safe place to live, have a job that pays their bills, and have kids that have happy lives. And it's very difficult for families to do that because of the lack of resources and lack of affordable housing. So their needs, they prioritize what's in front of them in their day-to-day sometimes more than they do what happens to the perpetrator who affected their lives.
I guess I'd like to speak to that question as well. In Oregon,
Come on.
Yeah. Once again, crime victims have all kinds of different opinions. In my opinion, in Oregon, there has been a voice at the legislature suggesting that crime victims are only tough on crime. I don't think that's true. In my work with survivors and victims of crime in Multnomah County especially, and statewide, there's a lot of people who see exactly what we're saying here, that if we can invest funds in a wise way, we can prevent future crime and we can help people recover from past crimes. So I guess to answer your question, we need to dig a lot deeper than we sometimes think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.